Hello, and a warm welcome to everyone who's attending today's presentation entitled Data Management, What is the Cost of Not Being in Control? Before I introduce our featured speaker, a very quick bit about Cansel and myself. Most of you are probably aware of Cansel and its 50 years of operations, which has evolved from a small two-person shop to a national presence with, I believe now, over 18 locations throughout Canada. Shown here are the primary product lines that have contributed to Cansel's growth and success over the years. And of note is that we are the #1 Canadian reseller of Autodesk and the global leader representing Trimble. So while most of you are familiar with Cansel, you're probably not aware of our emerging focus on data management and how it really underscores most of the product lines that we've invested heavily into over the years. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Mark Howry, and I'm the business development lead for our data management program. I came over directly from Blue Cello approximately about 1 year ago, and my focus continues to be on growing the Blue Cello user community here in and across Canada. Now, each company has its own levels of complexities and its uniqueness in concern with engineering factors, change intensities, concurrency, project collaboration, and geographic challenges when dealing with multiple sites across various locations, both internally and with project and third-party collaborators. So these are just but a few of the problems that companies like yourselves deal with, and some of the many challenges that our customers and yourselves face. So during this presentation, I'd like to ask you to think back to this image on your screen here and where your organization fits within the scale that's shown here. Because where you are on the scale depends upon which system and which solution will speak most clearly to the needs that you've got today and moving into the future. Ultimately, almost every organization, whether it's big or small, or one local site versus thousands of facilities scattered internationally, or whether the companies have a few projects per year or hundreds of projects that run concurrently, almost all organizations have one thing in common when it comes to data management. And pretty much everyone that we talk to has a mess. That's the common denominator that they share that impedes efficiencies within each department and then creates major information silos and collaboration roadblocks that ultimately impact the bottom line performance. And I'm sure many of you can attest to some of those harsh realities around a lack of data and document control. So we're not going to solve the world's data management problems today, unfortunately, but the intention stemming from the next 50 minutes or so is to take a proverbial step back so that we can move forward to the following. #1, to identify first that your organization's operational excellence is most likely being hampered by a lack of control. #2, to think about what would need to go on and go into a data management strategy that builds bridges and removes the islands of information that currently exist within your organization. And #3, to understand which stakeholders must be involved in order to move forward. And finally, #4, to gain a greater appreciation for what needs to be in place prior to implementing a data management system. Now, just a bit of housekeeping before I introduce Bernadette. want to ensure that all participants today know that you're in listen-only mode. So please use the GoToMeeting webinar panel to privately type in any questions that you may have. At the end of the presentation, we've allotted time for a Q&A session where I will read your questions directly to Bernadette. And finally, all those in attendance will receive a thank you email directly from Cansel with a recording of today's webinar, plus some white paper options. And now on to Bernadette. I've had the privilege of working with Bernadette over the past few years on a number of projects and events, and have heard her speak both locally and across the nation here. But what you'll see on her impressive resume is someone who began almost 20 years ago in the trenches of document and project management and came to the realization that there had to be a better way. So fast forwarding, she's now the founder and president of DMS 360. She's been asked to speak and has won awards on her intelligence around data and document management. She's actually designed her own education courses here and globally around data and document management. And she is now the CEO of CDMAC, which for the first time ever globally brings standards and certification into the realm of data management. But beyond the accolades and the speaking engagements, what I personally enjoy most about Bernadette is the passion that she holds for this niche. So without further ado, I give you Bernadette Bosse.
Oh, thank you, Mark. You are way too kind. Welcome, everybody, and thank you very much for joining us today. You know, Mark is right. I'm very passionate about these issues because one of the things that I have noticed over the years is that environmental and safety, sometimes fatal incidents are occurring in the engineering sector, regardless of the specific industry. And very often it is either directly because of or loosely tied back to the lack of information that people have in order to perform their work. There are, you know, multiple examples. You can Google any form of, you know, industry incident, whichever industry that you may be interested in researching, whether it be a pipeline leak, fatalities out at construction sites, you know, and we're talking construction in residential, commercial, and industrial construction sites. Very often there's just not the right information that is available to these construction operators and maintenance staff for them to be 100% knowledgeable about what they're doing. So what we're going to do today is I want to definitely talk about, so I'm just going to get to my next slide here. There we go. So these are the things that I want to talk about with you today, because there is a lot that we can do as a community of engineers and executives of, you know, in the drafting group. It's not just up to the document controllers to make sure that everything works well. It is very much a holistic joint effort by everybody in the organization, as well as those across organizations, to make sure that we all play our part in making the information not only available but current and accurate. And quality goes a long way. Now, in the past, some of you are fully well aware that the project management function has gone through this, just like the quality function has gone through the same process. Document management is a little bit late in the game, but it doesn't mean that we can't catch up at some point. This is why I'm doing all the different things that I'm doing with education and with certification of those educated professionals, and with creating standards across multiple industries on a global scale. The education that I've created for the University of Calgary is going to be extended to universities in Hong Kong and in the US as well this year, and ultimately 7 universities around the world so that we can educate all groups around the world. The biggest reason is because our global economy and our global workforce, it really is shrinking. Back in the day, it was ships to, for 3 weeks to get to a different location. But now you just hop on the plane with a visa and a passport and off you go. So we've done a lot of outsourcing of various fields and activities and tasks. And document control actually is not immune to that as well. However, if we can standardize the way we do all of the fundamental conceptual root of documentation and data management, we are going to have a much easier time at not only talking on the global scale and working on the global scale, but also within our own industry, within our own geographical area, we can then do a much better job. One of my goals through all of this is to improve the PR, so to speak, of the different industries so that we can get projects approved by governments or by communities to make sure that we can continue to provide the world, really, the globe, with the services and the products and the commodities that our lovely country can produce. So in this webinar, I'm going to talk about comprehending the relative importance of this whole complete documentation and data management strategy. So that is vital, because the biggest reason why you need to understand it is so that you can adopt it. And if you understand it and adopt it, you can talk about it. And you can talk about it to others. You can convince others of the path that we need to take as a unified team to making this environment a lot better. I'm going to talk about how you can understand the different elements of what a good documentation and data management system looks like, so that you can start to evaluate your organization and have a look at where those gaps might be for you at this point. I want you to understand the role of each department within an organization as it relates to information management. It's not, as I said, just the document controllers processing the information. We have the organizations and the individual groups and the individual parties creating this information, and they have a role to play in making sure that it is created in the best possible way. We also have support groups not involved with the creation of the information, but we have our IT or our IS groups. We have our software developers and our software providers, and we all need to work together. I would like you to know what the support is to manage the various categories and the classification of documentation and data. By knowing the support, particularly the executives and the project managers and the leaders, you can make sure and facilitate the best possible processes and practices within your organization and actually hold people accountable to them. And of course, we all want you to make better decisions surrounding functional requirements of software applications, specifically relating to the documentation and data management, which could include a barrage of different software platforms, and there's a lot of different components that goes into that, but we will talk about that as well to make sure that you fully understand what it is that you need to do. So in this first slide, we're going to talk about the importance of the strategy. The first thing that I want to really hit on is the impacts and the risks to not bringing in the strategy and this environment into your organization. There's these 3 topics or subtopics: safety, environmental, and financial. But if we have a look at them, I have some examples for you of how things have gone wrong. One of my, I don't want to say favorite because that sounds very morbid, but one of the good examples is that Space Shuttle Challenger. It was not directly due to the documentation, but documentation played a very vital role in that disaster. That included the O-ring that was not designed to be launched and operated in that specific temperature. They'd delayed the shuttle already for a few days, and the engineering group did not have the signed test reports confirming that this was an unsafe practice to launch in that temperature. So without that signed documentation, which ultimately changes the liability of decisions, it really, really does. Without that signed document that said, don't do this, it's not safe, they proceeded, and we all know what happened. We just recently in December, I'm not sure if it's well known, but through a company that I work quite closely with, they had a death on a construction site out in British Columbia. And it's very sad, and when I talk to the leaders of this organization, we tear up, both of us, because it's very sad. It's very, very sad. One of the executives, he's the director of operations, he mentioned to me that he's also very angry, though. He's angry for a multitude of reasons. He's angry for the incident, but he's also very angry because they've lost a lot of information that was within this one person. So when that person passed away, the information disappeared. So now we're talking about safety on of the project, because a lot of the information that they needed to progress has now been lost. The environmental impacts and risks are, in this day and age, other than the financial in the short term, the environmental impacts and risks are quite profound, because I was at a conference over the last 2 days, and one of the speakers was talking about the democratization of the industries, where the people, the communities, the stakeholders are taking back ownership and leadership of what they want to happen. It's no longer like in that TV show Dallas, where the big oil companies were in charge of everything and everybody just followed along. The people are taking back their power, and they are now demanding a lot more respect of the environment. Our government has stepped in and said perhaps we need to upgrade our regulatory requirements, which may or may not be true. I cannot speak to that. That is not my area of specialty. However, if we can at least meet the current regulatory requirements, that would go a long way to making sure that the design and the construction and the operation, which includes the maintenance and the inspections and all those lovely things, actually occur. Now, how do we get these things done? Well, first we have to know about them, which means that we have to have some form of communication that this is a requirement. We also then need to have the tools and checklists, or the clipboards, or the software, or the tablet applications, whatever the case may be, to be able to go out into the field and perform those activities and capture the fact that we've done these activities. That information then gets reported back into the software system or into the main repository at head office. And if it doesn't get back there, we need to have an escalation process, which also needs to be documented, so that we can have the powers that be in the organization make sure that these things are done. There was a pipeline leak that occurred because they had not been following the company's own requirements for inspection frequency. So there is a lot of mitigation that we can do from a safety and environmental perspective by having the documentation not only for us to follow, but also as evidence to the regulatory and the courts to say that, yes, we have these processes, oh, and have a look, we have been following them. It's all very lovely. The financial impacts and risks are, at this point, probably the most scary. There are companies spending an exorbitant amount of money every year on the inefficiencies of the documentation and the data management. Sometimes these companies have amazing software. So wherein then lies the problem? Is the problem with the technology? To be perfectly honest, sometimes it is. That's the last point we're going to talk about with the being able to do a better job at identifying your functional requirements. But we definitely want to make sure that we understand what we need so that when we do purchase that right software, we know how to request the right configuration to make the most out of it. Because software is only as good as the processes that you ask it to automate. Some other important errors or omissions, are included on the construction side, where you might have missed a drawing as a civil construction crew, and driven a pile in the wrong location off by a meter, and it costs hundreds of thousands of dollars to correct, whether it's cutting and capping and getting new steel, or it's rerouting lines, and there's a whole lot of different ripple effects that happen when one revision of one drawing does not get out to the construction site. Or in operation. I have done many audits on organizations, and I travel very often to the site to talk to the operators face to face about their experiences with information availability and accuracy out at the site. And very often, even these large, beautiful, shining examples of organizations, I'll have a look at their operators, and they tell me that they take a drawing and they walk out to the equipment, and they have a look at the drawing, they have a look at the equipment, and they toss the drawing in the air because it does not do anything for them. So now we have to go and have our operators, who are very experienced, great guys, great gals, but they are operating and maintaining this equipment largely due to experience and memory. And that is not at all safe, and it's not at all fair. It also goes to errors or omissions in regulatory applications and filings. We're talking about APSA and APEGA audits, or we're talking about any other regulatory group. In Ontario, we've got OSPI and OPI, and we've got the Engineering Act of Canada to be concerned with. All of these different regulatory bodies need something from us as organizations. And if it is not accurate, it can cause a delay, which is not going to be good for construction or for commissioning. So now that we've spoken about all those horrible, horrific things, let's talk about some of the things that we can do to fix it. And as Mark said, no, we cannot fix this overnight. However, we can definitely start overnight by working on the plan to get it to that fixed point. So the first element that I want to talk to you about is categories. So we need to categorize our documentation. Let's pretend that we have 3 or 4 buckets, empty buckets, and they can be whatever color you choose, and they are sitting out in front of you. And you walk into your organization and you have a look at your documentation. Whether this is your organization's already got some form of software, or if you've just got a network drive, and if you do, it's probably very messy, I'm sorry. But let's have a look at starting to organize this information. So you have 4 buckets in front of you, and you have your network or software open in front of you. You need to identify in the engineering sector which of the information that I have belongs in the bucket labeled drawings, facility drawings, because this bucket is very important. This bucket is going to be transported over to the facility. It's going to live with the facility. Eventually, when the facility gets decommissioned, or if you sell the asset, that bucket then either gets dumped out or it gets handed over to the new owner of the asset. The second bucket is also going to be for the facility, but it's going to be documents, facility documents. People wonder, what on earth is a facility document? Well, it's not a classified drawing, because drawings are very often through AutoCAD, and you've got 3D model files, and you've got all those lovely things, and sometimes the drawings are in Excel. But typically we have a mindset where drawings are put up on a little bit of a pedestal and they're treated differently. We need to treat facility documents that same way. So a facility document, it's a document and not classified as a drawing. However, it belongs to the facility, and the biggest and most common example of a facility document are your data sheets. Your data sheets are, they live with the equipment or the instrument or the valve, whatever the information is about. You are probably going to have on large facilities thousands, if not tens of thousands of data sheets. There's lots of different sources for your data sheets, your engineering company, your internal engineering, a vendor, a sub-vendor. But this is information that should never die at the end of a construction or design project. This needs to live on and be modified in the future or replaced if you're tracking serial numbers and all sorts of little pieces of metadata. And then in the third bucket, we are going to put the project information. Now the project information, because let's face it, we have a lot of data. We have many, many documents and many revisions. So we need to make sure that we understand how to categorize this information so we can reduce the load, because too much information can sometimes be a problem. So if we've got this project information, it's vital during a project, but at the end of a project, it can be archived. You can always go back and have a look at it, and you can maybe even copy parts out if you need to for future projects, but it's done. It needs to go away, all right? And then in this fourth bucket, we have our lovely corporate governance documentation. Corporate governance documentation is information that explains to the individuals in a company how to act. It's the IT policy, it's the HR handbook, it's an engineering specification, it's a project management manual, it's your document management procedures, your drafting standards, all these things that regardless of the facility or the project, this is how we do work. So that has to go in a separate bucket because it has a separate control mechanism. And each one of these buckets, just to let you know, it has got a different number and convention for the files. Drawings, facility documents, project documents, and corporate governance documents should not all be numbered the same way. And please, with your numbering structure, do not just give it a sequential number, give it some intelligence. Give it something so that the user of the information can understand what it is that they're looking at when they go into the area that it is stored. And now we move on to classification. So within your 4 buckets, let's think of you know, oil and water and how it all separates. So each bucket is its own separator. We have classifications for each one of those buckets. We have the published information. This is the information that has gone through its quality review, its technical checks. It has been approved, authenticated if required. It has been vetted and quality checked by your document management group, and it has been PDF'd or scanned or whatever the case may be, and it is now published for use by the users that need it. It is available information that is at a stage where people understand that, yes, I can use this. Then we have our originals, and our originals, those are delicate, fragile little files. These are going to be our hard copies with the wet pen signature on it, if that is the way you're authenticating. Perhaps it will be a digital file, a file that's been digitally signed, sorry, where if you're doing digital authentication on drawings, for example, you've got this CAD file or this modifiable drawing file with an embedded digital signature, normally using some form of specialized signing software. You're not going to modify that one ever again. It is a signed copy, just happens to be in modifiable format. And then, of course, we've got the modifiable files. These are going to be your PowerPoints or your Word, Excel, your drawing files, your 3D model files. And very often your modifiable files are going to include data files that may never be published documents or signed documents. So we're going to have process simulations if you're in an industry with process work. We're going to have data files or GIS files if you're in the survey or pipeline industry. So your modifiable files are your manipulative files. Well, they are not manipulative, but you can manipulate them. So we need to make sure that they're only manipulated by those authorized to do so, and only in accordance with the governance that we have now set forth on these modifiable files. Because the security you put on a modifiable drawing file and the security that you put on a PDF signed, scanned copy of that same drawing at that same number with the same revision, it's going to be very different. So we need to categorize and we need to classify our files. Because if you look at all your information and you put it into those buckets and it's separated within those buckets according to the classifications, now it's actually fairly simple to move ahead and create a storage structure and a numbering convention and workflows and securities based on those elements. With project documentation publishing, this is one of the categories and classifications that sends your project documents, your facility documents, and your drawings, your facility drawings, through a funnel of quality check, which is the document management process, out into the rest of the world. So a bit of an hourglass, but not necessarily a bottleneck. Excuse me. The publishing of project documentation is vital. You can't just willy-nilly have anybody sharing files all over the place, because there are certain things that the document management function looks at that nobody else would look at. So for example, we would make sure that any project-specific deviations or unique facility area numbering conventions, if you're working with another company, any of their specifications, if you're doing a joint venture, we want to make sure that these things are complied with. We also want to make sure that the document and drawing management elements are dealt with. So highlighting the changes, making sure that you're only authenticating to the appropriate changes and not to the whole drawing, when avoiding liability issues, making sure that the right issue stages have been used, the right revision number has been used. We even make sure that the scan is not crooked and that the clouds on changes of drawings, they don't overlap text. We do a lot of things in documentation and data management that no other group within an organization should have to deal with. They are paid way too much to be wondering about the revision number. So we do that, and we do that in a way that is very quick and efficient. The whole point is to make sure that everybody upstream of that has done their job, so that by the time it trickles down into document management, we do a quick check. Okay, this is how we can help to debottleneck the process, is by making everybody else work together on this as well. They do very vital things like making sure that there's index and metadata, making sure the distribution is good, making sure that it's stored in the right place. It's so much more than just getting documents that you have no idea what you're looking at on your desk and plugging in an index and emailing it off to some people. We do a lot of work with the procurement group to make sure that they understand the expectations for vendor documentation that comes in, so that we don't delay equipment shipments to site. We want to make sure that the reviews happen on this vendor information, so that we can make sure that there's no liability risk on the owner or on the agents acting for the owner, so the engineering contractor. There are a lot of different elements that go into publishing your project information. Now, project documentation, as I said, contains your facility drawings and your facility documents as it fits within that project. And then once that project is closed out, those kind of branch off into their respective areas for when there is no more project being done. A few more elements that we've got here is the vendor documentation management. Now, it is very difficult with vendor documentation, mostly because we're dealing with 100 vendors and they've each got 10 or 15 or 20 or 100 sub-vendors, and they've all got their numbering structure if we're lucky. And we don't get all of their revisions, but sometimes the project manager at the vendor, they go in on the weekend, they don't like the number, so they change it of the drawing or the document, or they go in on the weekend, they don't care about the number, but they change content and they don't revise the file. So vendor documentation can sometimes be the most frustrating, and it can also change not only the schedule of the equipment, but the cost of the purchase order, creating change orders. The reason why, or the situation where it would delay equipment to site is, for example, if you are procuring a fabricated piece of equipment and you have requested a specific ship date because of a scheduled shutdown, or it's the last piece of equipment before commissioning, or whatever the case may be. If the vendor comes back and says, you've only asked for drawings in a week, but I have to give them to you in 3 days and I need them back within 1 day, or we're not going to meet our shipment date. Document management with procurement and engineering and even drafting, we all have to work together to make sure that that is okay. But document management is the one that processes it. So we need to understand the schedule. We need to make sure that everybody understands that the schedule needs to be updated according to what the vendor's clarifications are. We need to make sure then that we can expedite it, which is that next point over there. Now, the only way that we can do that is by working together and using some tools that are actually very, very basic and simple, but can have a profound impact on a project. Those types of elements are called a black swan. If anybody's ever read the book by Nassim Taleb, the black swan is all about how seemingly small, innocuous little forms, one small document can have such a large impact on a project. So we need to make sure that we're expediting this information and also expediting the squad checks on all the documentation, whether it be vendor documentation or internal engineering documentation reviews, or reviews with other companies on joint ventures or engineering contractors, whatever the case may be. Another main element is the drawing and 3D model management, and this is actually one that scares me the most in industry at this point in time. People do not control their modifiable drawing files as they should. In most cases, it wouldn't stand up to a hard audit on the control of these files. Drawing files are particularly important on the modifiable side because we need to make sure that they don't accidentally, or sometimes on purpose, get modified without those control mechanisms, because this is the heartbeat that people in the construction industry and the operations staff, they use this to make sure that they can build and operate and maintain the facilities. We've also got a massive problem, and I'm sure a lot of you are aware, in concurrent project environments. There are more than one entity at a time needing to update and modify the same drawing, or, God forbid, the same model file. This can create so many different challenges for companies, and a big liability and a big safety risk as well. So we definitely want to make sure that the unique processes for the drawing files and the 3D model files are in place with sign-in and sign-out functionality and all these lovely things. We're going to talk a little bit about it at the software functional requirements portion, but I want to warn you, if you are evaluating software and they say, and you ask them if they can manage modifiable drawing files, they all say yes, because they can all upload the file extension, but being able to upload a file extension does not necessarily mean that it understands the relationship that the drawing files have with each other. So please note that being able to upload a file extension does not equate to being able to manage that file extension. The next element is your corporate governance documentation. Now, in the project environment, in the facility technical environment, your drawings and your documents, they change quite often, as they should. Things, get upgraded and projects progress and all those lovely, lovely things. However, in the corporate governance documentation world, we do not want to walk in every Monday and have to do our job a different way. So we need to very much make sure that the bucket that contains that corporate governance documentation has its own workflows, its own vault within a system, or its own area or drive within a network drive if you're going that route. We need to make sure that it has its own rules and its own processes. You cannot lump it together. Then we have our other documentation nuances, which is going to be relating to GIS data or shape files on Google Maps or survey files. Then we've also got our land information and our well information and our drilling information and the permitting and the royalties that occur there with all the land management when we're doing well sites. So not only do we have different kinds of documentation, but we've got facilities, we've got wells, we have mines, we have pulp mills, we have surveys, we have construction information. We have so many different little bits that change how we manage the information depending on where we are in the whole cycle of the facility build and management. To move on to the roles, these are some of the basic high-level roles and groups and business units within an organization that needs to work together. Because one thing that documentation and data does not care about are silos. They do not care that operations and engineers fight. They do not care if there's political positioning within your organization to build an empire in the division that you decide you want to build an empire in. It does not care and it does not matter. It's like holding a child hostage in a divorce. You don't need to do these silos. You very much need to have an integrated viewpoint on your information. It's like a child, and each one of these roles over here is a different family member. You don't all of a sudden split the child in two when the mom and the dad get divorced and they each want to share the kid. We need to treat the information in our organization like an actual resource. If you have job sharing of a resource, you maybe get them to do multiple functions, or they work half day in one area and half day in the next, and they grow and they learn as one entity regardless of the input. Our information needs to do the same thing. Because very often when each one of these groups cannot get along, they will, say for example, take a copy of the files from one group and plonk it into another group's software or network folder, and they'll modify it from there, and unbeknownst to the first group, who will also be modifying it. And now we're running into major problems with duplicate files and server and infrastructure issues, and people running around literally like chickens with their heads cut off trying to find the most recent version of a file. And if this was a scenario where it was an emergency that we needed that information, say a shutdown on a facility, or something's leaking, or somebody got stuck in a piece of equipment, we cannot be spending 3 hours doing searches through our software or our network drives hoping that we find the right version of a document to shut this equipment or this facility down. It's not the right way of doing it. Project management is vital because project management is 70% documentation. They are accountable and responsible for so much on the project, but mostly for delegating and being able to track and monitor what people are doing, to provide earned value reporting to the executives or to the finances, to make sure that, yes, we are progressing as such, not because I say so, because we've used so many man hours, but because I have documented evidence of the progression of the project. So project management needs to, out of everybody, include documentation and document management into the whole structure of things, not only into the scoping and the estimating, but also into the scheduling and including in the project meetings and working with the structures to make sure that people are held accountable to them. Engineering plays a vital role because they are the ones touching most of the information. Procurement is vital. Now, document management as a department within an organization does not typically manage procurement's documentation, but procurement deals with the vendors. They give them the instructions. Your design and drafting group, very often they'll be managing the modifiable files themselves, if not in conjunction with document management. They have to clean up files and bind files and manage X references and manage 3D modeling when we're talking about concurrent engineering. Construction needs to understand what's going on, and we've got construction work packages and engineering work packages that go out as a part of this construction management. We need to make sure we understand what they want. We need to know what the operations and maintenance guys need for their asset management, because so often we're so convinced that we know everything we need on a project, but we forget that outside of our little project silo, There's our little operational silo. So we need to break those walls down and get the operators and the maintenance guys talking with the project and the finance and the IT teams to talk about what everybody actually needs. And then, of course, again, with those nuances, we've got these other groups. We've got our land department, our drilling guys, the production accountants, and the production engineers, and all these lovely things. And it goes from documentation during the project to documentation on the facility to, and we'll talk briefly about the Internet of Things. But a lot of that becomes part of this whole big data thing that people are talking about, where you've got all this production data that you need to monitor and receive and analyze, but it goes hand in hand with the information that is found within the documentation. So to support this, here are the elements that need to be supported. Scoping and estimating through the project management, the engineering, the drafting, the procurement process. We need to make sure that if there is a new project, that you understand the documentation and the deliverable requirements and the schedule and the expediting and the efforts that need to go in to creating the information that you need on your project. You need to make sure that your organization has a review process and an approvals matrix. You must absolutely have these things because you need to be able to understand and support these regulatory requirements. Accountability is key if you are going to have any sort of changes in your organization to make sure that you have processes and procedures or successful software implementation. People need to be held accountable. Too often I go into organizations and the middle management really wants to change, but when I talk to the executives, they ho-hum a little bit about it. And I tell them, you need to support this. This is what it's going to do to your bottom line. Normally that convinces them, because they did not realize that something as mundane as document management has such a profound impact on the actual bottom line that goes off to the stakeholders and the investors in the communities. We have to hold people accountable, and that includes holding our technology and our software accountable. Too long we have only relied on technology to provide us with the solutions that we need for our problems. But really what it is, it's a business first. It's a business first. We need to have a business problem to resolve if we are going to find tools to help us fix it. So we need to figure out what those business needs are. You can only find out what your business needs are by having a look at or creation of processes and procedures in every department that touches your information. You can then, with your buckets and with your processes and procedures and your business needs, you can identify your security requirements. Security requirements is not just something that comes from IT. Security requirements is a business need. You need to say, I have drafters that can modify the drawing files, but I do not want my engineers even seeing them. Because if they can see them, even read-only, they can take those files and send them to a friend who's got AutoCAD at home, for example. Or they send it off to themselves. Perhaps they want to do some drafting work on the weekend because they very much care about progressing their project, and if there's no drafters available, they might be overcome with the need to do it themselves. So we need to protect them from doing the wrong thing by these securities, but it is a business need. It is not just an IT requirement. We have remote access. What about the field? What about your bandwidth? How much information is going back and forth? Do we have apps that we can use? Do we have, web versus client licenses out in the facility operator room? What about third-party access during construction, during engineering? Are our engineering companies going to work with us in the same structure? Are we going to have a transfer portal where we can transfer back and forth very safely while maintaining that quality and that confidentiality? We need to work with the IT and the IS department. Very often, organizations, talking about silos, have a massive separation between the IT group and the business group. And the business group says they want things, and the IT group comes back and says, oh, we can't do that because of our server. Oh, we can't do that because of back-end integration with software. But you know what? This is not going to solve anything. We need to bring everybody together. It's one company, after all. We all are working towards making one company successful, not just our IT department or engineering department, because you won't be a company otherwise. So the IT group and the business group both need to be involved in the software review, and they both need to be involved in the software implementation, because there are so many elements that need to go in to the correct structure for your organization. And we need to make sure as well that when we're looking at that business side, we include a cross-functional team, representation from operations, representation from engineering, absolutely representation from document management. We have to make sure, because if we go into the Internet of Things, it was a very interesting discussion that I've been witness to over the last 2 days, where people are talking about whether this is a fad or not, and you know, I don't believe it is. Because we are getting smarter devices all the time. And the Internet of Things and the industrial Internet of Things is talking about our equipment out at site. You know, long gone are the days where just SCADA will work with our RTUs and our PLCs. We need to make sure that our other devices can actually do things. There were talks on artificial intelligence and a lot of futuristic things, but it all takes data. Data very often comes from documentation. And if the processes and the procedures and the software tools are not there to create the highest quality, most accurate, almost real-time information, then how are we going to support this future goal of getting things automated and intelligent? So in conclusion, documentation and data management is way more than just administration functions. It requires everybody to be involved, do their part, both upstream and downstream of the document controllers in particular. They are only a portion of the documentation management system and structure. We need to have technology that supports the right software for the business needs. It needs to have the software, so the technology supports the software supports the business, and the processes and procedures support the business. So if we can build that foundation and that understanding across the entire organization and build it up like a beautiful Jenga puzzle, hopefully that does not fall down at any point, then we can have a lovely structure and a lovely system to make sure that everybody gets the information that they need so that we can prevent financial and safety and environmental risks in everything that we do. So that takes me to the end of that, and I want to thank you very much for having a listen to what I have to say. I really hope that it has done some help for you. And please, can you let me know right now by typing in the questions section if you have any questions that I can answer for you at this point in time. And Mark, if you wouldn't mind facilitating the questions. Mark? Can you confirm, Mark, that you are not muted, as I would like to hear if they have any questions for me? Okay, lovely. I see one coming through right now. And one of the questions is, how long does it take to get the systems and the processes updated? Well, that is a good question. And it very much depends on your organization and where you are. So the biggest word of advice that I can give you is if you understand where you are, where your organization is now, then you can go ahead and find out where you need to be, and that will give you the path of what steps you need to take. So it very much depends on how good or how bad things are for you, how old the company is, what the intensity is in the engineering documentation, and also where you want to be. So that's going to be dependent on the type of company you are. But it also it depends on how far you want to push it. So if you want to have an all-encompassing, beautiful emerald city of a documentation data management structure, which I always think is best, but it takes a while. You might want to phase it out, so you can do your first conceptual phase on maybe the biggest trouble area first. That might take a few months. If there's migration of data that has to happen or new software implementation, that would extend that process. But you would be able to say fix up your the publishing of your information within 6 months. You could do your drafting documentation, your modifiable files within another 3 months. But also we have to be careful of change management within an organization, because we need to make sure that people can adopt the changes and not get too scared about what's going on. So we want to make sure that we do it the right way. Any other questions that we have right now?
Bernadette, it's Mark here. Can you hear me
yes,
now? Oh, good. There was 2 or 3 other questions here. So one was, what sort of resources does it take to create processes, select software, and implement new systems?
Oh, excellent. Okay, so the type of resources, one of the biggest problems right now is that documentation and data managers have not had a lot of support from a formal education perspective in the past. And we need to make sure that when we are looking for somebody who's very experienced, because that is what you need for your procedure creation. When you're looking at somebody very experienced, you don't just want to go years experience, because very often they've been doing the same thing the same way for 20 years. So they're not really senior, they're just older, if that makes any sense. So you want to make sure that you have the right resources. And sometimes there are companies who, or individual contractors who've got the experience that you may need, but I would interview them. I would talk about the issues that you have and listen to what they want to do and exactly how they want to do it, so that you can trust them. You may not always know, but you definitely need to find a trusted resource. And one of the best pieces of advice I can give on this is that it is cheaper to hire a more expensive contractor or consultant or independent contractor, whoever you go with, and get them to train and mentor a junior intermediate person who does not have as many bad habits. It is much cheaper to do it that way than to hire a senior who doesn't know what they're doing for a very long period of time and have your systems fail. So I hope that answers that question.
Excellent. Okay, there are 2 others so far. So how do we migrate files from the old system into a new system?
Well, the first thing that needs to happen is a grandfathering line. You don't necessarily always want to migrate all your information over, because you may not get the value for your money or time and effort spent on migrating your files. But the first very important thing is to clean up your data. Because if you migrate all your data over and there are, tons of duplicates, we've done migration work where there was 19 copies of the same drawing. So we don't want to just go ahead and plunk your information into a new structure. You want to clean up and clarify that data before you move it in. That's going to help your infrastructure as well, and your IT group will be a lot happier. And then you've got to have that new structure with the securities in place. Your training needs to be in place. You migrate while people are being trained as much as possible, so that once the training is done, you can hit the go button. The files are there for them to actually work on and apply their training. So there's a bit of a balancing act, but there's definitely grandfathering, cleanup, and then appropriate migration.
Okay. See here, just trying to make this bigger. What's your take on the new 3D modeling data sharing for the project lifecycle, mainly BIM models?
Model sharing is good, because we need to make sure. So this is another problem that I have with models, is that sorry, the engineering contractors are being paid a lot of money to create 3D models that go nowhere after the project. And there is so much value that an organization who owns an asset can take out of this 3D model. So the 3D model, it can be so much. So we can attach information to the 3D model. We can use the 3D model during constructions, and afterwards we can as-built the 3D model. We have concurrent engineering that happens at the same time on 3D models. And I mean, we've worked with companies to establish their concurrent 3D model processes and practices, and that's because they weren't quite sure yet on how to share the information and share the space within the model. But then we have other issues like making sure they're using the same databases, because I know structural always likes to use their own one because it's better for them, but it's not, nobody else can use it, and it becomes a blocked, unintelligent, image inside the 3D model. We also want to make sure that we use that 3D model and tag it to other information. I mean, we can build 3D models of just about anything, and there are a lot of groups that can provide input and also share the information that comes out of a 3D model, but we just need to make sure that we are very careful about the securities, the ownership of the files and the information, and how it is shared. So should we share? Yes, absolutely. I think there's a great value in that, but it needs to be done carefully, as with everything. I think moderation is the key to everything, isn't it?
Okay, that's great. And I know that Blue Cello actually has some built-in modules within its software package that tie directly into BIM and Revit, so that all changes are integrated as they happen, no matter how complex the 3D modeling that occurs. And there's just one other really quick question. I think you've touched upon some of it, Bernadette, but it was about what are some of the actual contributors to the costs of not having control of your data. And we are really at the top of the hour here, but bottom line, I think, on that subject is there's some amazing studies out there, one by the ARC Advisory Group, which is a global watchdog for asset lifecycle information management, and one by NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and they've had studies dating back a few years estimating that the costs of bad data for 1 year in the United States for major capital facilities was around $16 billion. So these losses are directly attributable to a lack of control that begins with what we're talking about today, which is data and collaboration silos. So Bernadette, I just wanted to thank you very much. I wanted to remind everyone again that, as mentioned earlier, all attendees will receive a thank you email from Cansel with a recording of today's webinar that can be shared with your peers and colleagues. Plus, we'll provide some white paper options for you. So thank you again very much, Bernadette, and thank you all for